This is the S2G podcast, where we share conversations that help us understand how to scale the food, agriculture, oceans, and energy transitions. I'm your host, Tanya Bekritzis. In this episode, we're looking back at some of our 2023 trends to see how they're faring today. As a reminder, this content is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investor or potential investor in any investment vehicle sponsored by S2G. Investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Specific companies mentioned in this podcast are for educational purposes and should not be construed as an endorsement of any kind. Please note that S2G may maintain investments in some of the companies discussed on this podcast. For more important information, please see s2gventures.com/disclosures. Last year, we published a report entitled Trends Shaping the Future of Food in 2023. A year later, we wanted to check in with the S2G team members who contributed to the report to see how these trends were holding up. In our last episode, we reviewed the 3 agtech trends, and in this episode, we'll look at supply chains, cellular protein, and food as health. To kick us off, I interviewed Dan Ripma about the trend that food will become central in the effort to prevent chronic disease and improve health outcomes. In our report, we said the convergence of food and healthcare will continue to accelerate as companies develop new food-based solutions in the direct-to-consumer and healthcare sectors. Discovery platforms will bolster this effort as new bioactive compounds are discovered and paired with specific use cases. Here's Dan.
I am Dan Ripma. I've been on the S2G team for just about 6 years working in our food and agriculture fund. I'm currently a vice president within our investing team. And day to day, I largely focus on our portfolio within the convergence of food and healthcare. So many of the companies that I work with day to day are companies in our portfolio like Nourished Mend, Fife, Big Bold Health, and several others.
Amazing. We did our annual look ahead at the year. And in that report, we said that food as medicine initiatives will only continue to accelerate as we connect compounds and foods to health outcomes and consumer demand grows from more holistic forms of healthcare. Love to start off with understanding what's happened this year. How has the trend fared in your mind?
I think we've continued to see it accelerate throughout the year. It still remains a sector that has many different individual parts, and so it's hard to put everything into one trend or one metric. But both within our portfolio, on the policy side, and with corporates and other investors, I think we're seeing more interest in the intersection. We've seen more capital go into the space. We've seen new business models and companies start to really focus on these areas. And I think it's been in a year where it's been challenging from a macroeconomic perspective and a fundraising perspective. There's probably a few things we could talk about, but I think with the organization that we put together, the Food Nutrition Health Investor Coalition, we put that together last year in coordination with the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. And I think the goal of that was really to bring together food investors, healthcare investors, their respective corporate venture capital, and others to really catalyze capital into the space, help educate each other on our respective expertises. And I think we've seen that be beneficial as well. Throughout that organization, I think we've seen more and more interest within this intersection, both in terms of capital, time, resources into new companies. So I think so far we've seen that accelerate.
So much of this is creating scientific buy-in that these solutions are viable, right? And I'm curious what's happened this year. Has anything moved forward in that respect to sort of prove out the validity of these solutions to the healthcare community?
I do think there's a growing body of work that's proving it out. When we think about this food and healthcare convergence, we're really thinking about the spectrum across medically tailored meals, dietary supplements, medical foods, and therapeutics. And across those, it's a different timeline for scientific evidence to be discovered and verified. I think on the therapeutic side, those are much longer, but we're seeing some progress both within our portfolio and outside of our portfolio to support that, food or dietary modulation can lead to a real treatment or prevention state. The data isn't fully there. We don't have drug validation, but that's a future state that we think is feasible. Within the other three categories, I think we're seeing a growing body of work. And I mean, even outside of our portfolio, on the medically tailored meal side, there have been organizations that have put together capital to support clinical studies to understand, what the beneficial outcome is of using medical foods in a variety of different healthcare settings, mostly focused around chronic disease.
The White House event was a huge deal. Obviously, you talked about FNHIC. Has anything progressed on the policy side that you feel is really worth noting?
Maybe two interesting things. So everyone expected there to be a follow-up White House conference this year. But I think with everything going on in the world, with elections coming up, that didn't end up happening. But an organization called Great Green Media had a food as medicine policy summit, which they've had for many years. And it's the first time that event has been 100% sold out. And so I think you're seeing on the private sector still that growing interest, and especially that, convergence point between private sector and policy. So I think that's one just validation point that people are still interested. I think in the policy arena, it's always relatively slow, but I think there's been an increased focus on it across a number of different areas, from some shifting budgets more focused on kind of food within a healthcare intervention space. That's been more state by state.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot more state by state progression this year than on the federal side, but I think it is a nice movement.
As you think about just some of the use cases or business models or products, is there anything you're seeing that's getting the most adoption, or, ways that companies should think about tackling this problem where you feel like there's the most success and scalability?
I would say one area that we see growing and that we're excited by is really perioperative nutrition. So earlier this year, we invested in a company called Men Nutrition. There are several businesses out in the space really focused on nutritional interventions within a surgical setting, effectively helping patients get healthier to undergo surgery and helping them recover faster.
Yeah.
And I think that's an area that's really interesting for a number of parties. I think that area is growing. Some of our co-investors have invested in a few companies in that space. And so I think we're seeing that grow. We're seeing that being adopted by the market more quickly. I think the second and maybe a little bit larger payers, I think, remain interested in using food or diet in their government services programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare Advantage. Some of those benefits have kind of gone up and down, but I think there is a lot of focus of trying to figure out how do you use those effectively. I think that's really been the core question. And so you see companies trying to use those benefits and use what exists to really help reduce chronic disease or other disease states using food. And I think maybe a shakier trend or part of the business, but I still think we're seeing that progress, and we're still seeing a lot of interest there.
Why do you think those are moving forward more quickly? Like, if you take the surgical use case, what's the benefit that's giving that momentum?
There's probably a few elements to it. One thing that I find interesting that's definitely helping in the sector kind of goes back actually to the foundation of S2G, where we were focused on really a changing consumer mindset that was affecting purchasing in grocery store, fast casual restaurant, or wherever you're purchasing food. And I think parallel to that, you have patients going to their physicians, whether it's a surgeon, primary care physician, or some other doctor, looking for a more natural solution first. And I think that has been very beneficial for this sector and has been maybe the foundation for this sector to accelerate. The second is because the healthcare industry has not historically focused on food or nutrition within these spaces, there isn't an existing set of solutions that consumers can go to. There's a lot of work that's been done over the past, 30, 40, 50 years on dietary modulation for type 2, for other kind of chronic disease or cardiometabolic diseases. But you haven't seen that expand much outside of that. And now you're seeing the real use cases outside of that, whether it's perioperative nutrition, nutrition around cancer treatments or adjunctive therapies. So I think you're really just starting to see those progress. The science has progressed, and now there's real use cases for them.
So one thing that we didn't talk about yet is how do you incite behavior change? And, when you look at these programs, what are the models that you see that are working to get real engagement with whether it's, patients or members of certain health plan community?
I think there's a number of attributes that help encourage behavior change. I think what we've seen be successful is the pairing of both a physical product and a digital platform with some level of human touch.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we've seen programs try to take away the human element entirely, we haven't seen those be successful. When we've seen it fully digital, we've seen a significant drop-off over a longer period of time. Where we've seen success is they have some avenue of food and diet, some sort of digital platform where there's some bidirectional interaction, and then some human element where they aren't completely removed from that. And that's where we've seen the most success.
As you look into the new year, is there anything you're really excited about or predictions on where this is heading in the next, 12 months?
I don't know that this is necessarily a prediction, but I would like to see more traditional healthcare investors get invested into the space. I think it's still a pretty small number. To be fair, it's still a small number of food investors. We're really at this tweener space where it's hard for a lot of food investors to underwrite. It's hard for a lot of healthcare investors to underwrite. I think over the last year, we've seen more interest in some of our companies and some companies outside of our portfolio where healthcare and traditional digital health investors are interested, but we haven't seen them transact. And I think the difficult thing to really unravel is the market that we're currently in from a fundraising environment is not strong. And so if that changes next year, will we see those investors come in and start to deploy capital towards some of these solutions? That's one area where I guess I'd like to see, and I would predict that it happens at least in the next 3 years, but I think it's a little bit more market dependent. 2, I think you'll see some pure play digital health companies start to either launch business models that include food or acquire companies that have that food solution, food, medically tailored meal, dietary supplement, medical food, something in that. Just because I do think that they're seeing drop off in retention rates. And I think that physical product component is something they'll look for. It'll be a margin suppression for them, but it'll be, I think, increase in their top line overall. Again, maybe not next year, but the next couple years. And then, I think maybe 2 other things. I think you'll continue to see advancement on the scientific community. I think maybe the main focus area that I think we'll see advancement in the next maybe year, 18 months is epigenetics and the influence specifically of diet on epigenetics. I think that'll be a bigger aspect that people are focused on from both a company building perspective and a research perspective.
Can you say more about epigenetics?
Epigenetics is really the modulation of genes based on outside factors like lifestyle, diet, environment, all of those. It's really how it influences that underlying genetics. The notion for a long time is that you couldn't modulate genes effectively epigenetically. I think what we're seeing now in some early studies is that there are a number of areas where you can utilize food or across that spectrum to really affect that underlying aspect. I think one company in our portfolio, just to bring this to life a little bit, I think is Big Bold Health. They've finalized and done all of the research for really the epigenetic modulation of the immune system. I think that's a really interesting component, but I think that's one of many. And I think it's going to be representative of a much wider push into that sector.
So exciting. Obviously, you have a wealth of knowledge of investing in food. You've been researching this space, and your hope is that more, healthcare-focused investors will become interested. So what would you say to them about how to think about investing in this space, and what's the call to action there?
I think the call to action is really just to be open to new business models as long as the data and clinical studies support it. I think the hard thing, and it's totally understandable, but I think the hard thing is that take drugs, for example. It's largely been a single molecule paradigm for a long time. And both from a scientific perspective and a business model perspective, that's very simple. Effectively, here's a pill, take a pill, you're good. And from a business model, you're just manufacturing and selling pills, and that's much easier. I think what we're seeing from the scientific front is there are some more complicated operational solutions that are having really high efficacy. And I think the data is starting to support those solutions. And I guess the call to action is really like, if there's data to support it, even with the business model being different from more of a single molecule perspective or single molecule mindset, being more open to investing in those companies and helping build those companies, I think is really what this sector is going to need long term.
Amazing. Are you open for healthcare investors who want to learn more?
Absolutely.
To call you?
Absolutely.
As you can tell, this is an area we're really excited about. It's great to see increased momentum from stakeholders across the technology, healthcare, and policy sectors to transform health outcomes through data-backed, food-based solutions. Next, I interviewed Kate Danaher, Managing Director at S2G, about how supply chain resilience will improve food security. As a quick recap, we said that the globalization of food supply chains has created significant complexity and information asymmetry between producers and consumers. Better optimized supply chains will result in numerous social, economic, and environmental benefits and improve food safety and supply chain transparency. Here's Kate.
My name is Kate Danaher. I am one of two managing directors at S2G Ventures running our Oceans Fund.
In our report in March, we said increased data collection across the supply chain paired with advances in AI and ML are enabling optimization solutions that will substantially lessen the environmental externalities of transportation while creating efficiencies and cost savings. So would love to hear from you, your thoughts on this. Did this come to life throughout 2023? And how do you see this trend faring?
Sure. So Tanya, you know this well, but for anyone listening, I run the Oceans Fund, but S2G also invests across two other verticals, energy and sustainable food and agriculture. These trends, I think, do apply and continue to apply in those other two, but I'm going to focus mostly on oceans. And when you think about supply chains and oceans, it's a lot around maritime transportation, port efficiency, things like that. And before I answer how the trend is faring, I think we have to think about what was happening before 2023. We were at the tail end of COVID. The supply and demand curve was really out of whack as a lot of people were increasing their spending and buying things online. And then that kind of plateaued. And if anybody remembers, there was a huge crunch at ports where boats were trying to come in, warehousing was short, boats were stranded outside of ports for months at a time with supply and goods just waiting to get onto land. So that's where we were before 2023. And while that has mostly self-corrected, the trend around the use of AI and machine learning in optimizing these supply chains has really picked up, partially because a lot of people don't ever want to go back there again. So we're seeing a lot of interesting technologies and innovations around port optimization, being able to time and create more transparency about what's coming in and out of port and how inventory is being managed and tracked. We're also seeing a number of regulations, unrelated to COVID, but a number of regulations coming out of Europe and out of the International Maritime Organization that are really creating tailwinds around the decarbonization of the maritime sector. And when you think about decarbonization, that really means more efficiency in terms of route optimization, fuel optimization. So I think that a lot of us talk about decarbonization and reducing greenhouse gases, and it sounds very altruistic, but those same technologies really hit the bottom line for a lot of these maritime shipping companies. So there's a lot of interest from the maritime sector in innovating on these technologies because it actually hits their bottom line as well as helps them meet these new regulations around greenhouse gases.
Fantastic. So in short, it sounds like this trend is accelerating.
Yeah, I would say so.
One of the themes I know you all spend a lot of time in is ocean intelligence. Would love to hear your thoughts on, what that really means and how might that be affecting ocean shipping as a major component of supply chains.
So ocean intelligence is a broad category for us, but essentially what that means is what hardware or software technologies are we using to expand the collection of data within the oceans, aggregate that data and create valuable insights that industry, government, consumers, like whoever it is, can optimize those insights to make better business decisions, climate decisions, regulatory decisions, you name it. So we call that ocean intelligence. Within that, I think one good example of, like, to get really precise about how ocean intelligence impacts supply chains and optimization is we have a company in our portfolio called So Far Ocean Technologies. They're really interesting because they're a hardware software solution. They have a couple thousand buoys, like little buoys that float around the ocean globally at all times. And because most weather forecasting systems are using publicly available data, because nobody has like down to the water level real-time data available, it's mostly a mashing together of publicly available data. So Far Ocean Technologies takes that data, overlays it with all the data that their buoys are collecting 24 hours a day. And what comes out of that is a highly reliable, the most accurate weather forecasting system essentially on the planet. And there's a lot of ways that you can use that data. There's a lot of ways that that data can be applicable to the aquaculture industry and wild fisheries. Governments are very interested. The Navy and NOAA just threw a bunch of So Far buoys out of a plane into the eye of a hurricane to try and understand the behaviors and the predictability of big climate events. But the first product that So Far went to market with was essentially creating, the simplest way to put it is the Waze app for maritime shipping. Because again, reducing your greenhouse gases, reducing your fuel consumption has a very meaningful impact to the bottom line for shipping companies. And so in maritime shipping, they're able to save companies, call it like 6 to 10% on their fuel usage by helping them optimize routes by using their data.
In a sector where decarbonization hits the bottom line, there's a lot of momentum towards more efficient and resilient supply chains. And with the accelerated pace of AI development, there's immense opportunity for better demand forecasting, route optimization, and supply chain transparency. Next, I spoke to Larsen Mettler about cultivated protein. Last year, we said that cultivated protein has the potential to meet the growing demand for animal and seafood products while minimizing negative externalities. While there are significant barriers to scaling, progress is being made to bring costs down. Here's Larsen.
My name is Larsen Mettler. I'm one of the managing directors for S2G Oceans.
One of the topics that I know you and the Oceans team are focused on is protein production. And last year we talked in the report a bit about, the technology for protein cultivation is ready for commercialization, but that to bring a product to market, companies need to really focus on the cost, brand building, labeling, consumer education, because a lot of this is new, and improving the supply chain and input. So that was a lot to cover in that one statement. So we'd love to just get your take on the trend. How did it fare this year, obviously, and what was a bit of a tough financing environment? So
there's a lot to cover there. Over the last several years, it's been some relatively new technology that investors have been very excited about. We really view this as a technology that is necessary for the future to bridge the protein gap and nutritional demands of a growing population. With that, we've seen a lot of newcomers in the space, and we saw funding, being rapidly deployed by folks throughout kind of 2020 through 2022. In 2023, certainly with the financial downturn here, we've seen a little bit more difficult financial environments for people to raise funding. We kind of view this sector as coming in three waves right now. There were the front runners, the folks that had a couple year advantage. They were really developing the front end technology and all the way through the process. So they were inventing new bioreactors, they were looking at new media, looking at end products, and even how to market it, and then also work with regulators and governments on it. And there was a second wave that we believe has taken more refinement to the product. So maybe a specialization within a species, maybe a specialized type of bioreactor media. A lot of, kind of those second wave companies may have been earlier with some novel ideas and received, seed funding that weren't very large checks. I think that they've been able to stretch those out and make them last. However, I do think that there will be a significant number of those companies who don't make it to the next round of funding and meet the milestones that are necessary, really because of that entire pullback in the economy here. With that, there will be substantial opportunities for the other producers to acquire people. I think there's the ability to acquire technology, and there's also an ability to start looking at some of the asset acquisitions as well. It's unfortunate for those entrepreneurs and those companies, but it should create a little bit of consolidation and maybe lessen the funding burden on the entire sector as a whole. And in 2023, what we've really seen emerge that has gotten funding has been very specialized folks within the supply chain. So people that aren't trying to do everything soup to nuts, but maybe they're focused in developments of certain cell lines. Maybe they're focused on just producing a bioreactor or a media and production technique. So we've seen those folks having success, and they've also come with smaller, longer term CapEx plays versus some of these additional players. So I think we're close to seeing some of these products on the shelves in restaurants. I think that in the US in particular, on the ocean side and seafood, we'll probably see that in 2024. I think we were expecting to see it in 2023. So our predictions were off probably by 6 months or so, but I think that's pretty good in an area like this. It's high growth and has a lot of regulatory framework to work through. And the other component where we're seeing a little bit of change in the way that people are investing is increased scrutiny with a lot of the hype and capital that was free flowing over the last several years. When that got pulled back, new metrics are being deployed of how you evaluate these companies. So we're seeing things really focused around cost, and that can be process, that can be the media you're using, that could be, are you using digital twins and AI? How are you scaling up? And it could also be the approach to the market. So are you going for a large TAM commoditized product where you really need to get down on the price point? Or are you going for more of a high-end product with a smaller TAM ultimately?
Yeah, would love to hear you dig into that last one. As you said, different approaches in the market. Some like UpFoods and Eat Just are, coming in with those, lower price products that are more commoditized, widely available. But then we see other companies focusing on the higher end, things that are more in demand and short supply. How do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, I think they're both making strides, but in different ways. So the folks that tend to be focusing on the commoditized products tend to be some of those earlier folks. And they did receive significant amounts of capital. They're the ones who are able to scale up first. So they have also been able to get their costs down faster. On some of the products in seafood, we're seeing salmon costs come down on the cultivated side very quickly. However, when we look at some of the nuanced products, those costs are still quite high because of the smaller bioreactor size and the type of media that they're using. So I think earlier folks got more money, scaled up quickly, have got their costs down. They're still not the cost parity. They've got a ways to go, and that will take time. But I think that the folks who are playing more in the higher end niche market, may have a path to profitability earlier, although they don't have the path right now to actually lowering their costs. So it's a little bit of a balance there.
Is there anything you're really excited about seeing as an upcoming development, or anything that you think is an unlock?
Yeah, one thing that I think a lot of the market is eager to see is this continued use of AI and digital twins. We're looking at biological processes here and potential continuous fermentation and a lot of liquid dynamics within those biological processes that can make scaling difficult. So I think that the further advancement and faster that comes on will enable people to get to those higher scales with quality products and less contamination.
Coming from the portfolio side and companies that are building, solutions in this space, is there anything they should be thinking about, or would you advise them to be thinking about navigating the funding environment today?
I think that when you're navigating the funding environment, it is really important now to be able to communicate some of the individual KPIs and key milestones that you are achieving. Before, a couple of years ago, I think it was good enough to come out with, this is an idea, and we're able to put a product forward. People didn't really know what metrics to be looking for and what metrics would differentiate a company as someone who's doing good work versus having a good idea. So going forward, I think it's important for a lot of these companies to, one, have a solid scientific base, but have maybe your chief scientific officer be able to talk to investors in a very detailed way, because the investors that are taking this very seriously are hiring those technical advisors that can really dig into what you're doing at the granular level. So I also think even the measurements, right? Like people used to be talking about what is your yield on the products when you're producing it through this fermentation. And it used to be good enough to give them a number maybe that came from one batch. But now people are really looking at like, if you had, I'll make up a number, you had 30% yield on one batch, but you had to throw out 7 batches to get to that 30% yield, right? Like they're counting all of them now. It wasn't it's no longer good enough just to say this is your best batch and that's what you can achieve. So
interesting talking about what investors have learned more. I'm also curious on the flip side, from consumers or just awareness of this innovation and trend. What have you seen as far as like consumer appetite for this type of product? Do you see shifts happening throughout the year? And what do you expect going into the new year?
Yeah, I think that in 2023, again, I was hoping to see more products on the shelves or in restaurants, and that didn't happen at this point. We saw some earlier approvals in, Singapore, and then, into the US and I believe the Netherlands as well. We've also seen some bans, right? We saw Italy ban these products really to protect heritage. But without a doubt, the dialogue has increased. I think the awareness has increased and the availability has increased. A couple of years ago, if I spoke about this with my friends or family, everyone thought it was really science fiction and something that sounded impossible. Now people realize that this is something that is coming up very quickly. People are reading about this, in the New York Times and stuff now. So it's taking a little bit more center stage and people are interested.
As this starts to roll out, how do you think labeling would be addressed if we pick up lab-grown sashimi in a few years? What do you think it will say?
Yeah. I did have a conversation with someone at the FDA about this maybe about a month ago. So his opinion was that you wouldn't be able to just say, this is tuna, right? I think it was you're going to have to label that it is cultivated protein to start with. He noted that most of these first products are probably going to be blended products and hybrids. They will have, probably some mycelium aspects or something like that to it, where there's some vegetable blended into it for structure or for nutrients and taste and texture. So those will certainly need to be on it. And there's potential as well to really start digging into what are those feedstocks that are going into the products as well, right? So, what kind of serum and media are you using for the growth factors and having those on the label. So I think those all seem very reasonable and are probably necessary, I think, for the consumer to have full transparency and be comfortable with what they're putting in their body.
This year has brought some major developments to the cultivated protein sector, such as regulatory approval and advancements in AI. But there has also been increased scrutiny around costs and pathways to scale. More than ever, companies need to be able to communicate milestones and KPIs. Not every company will make it, but the companies that emerge will see more hiring, technology acquisition, and funding opportunities. For more on the future of food and agtech, check out our show notes for links to related blog posts and last year's trends report. Thank you for tuning into the S2G podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with a friend. For more information or to connect with us, check out s2gventures.com.